offset should be the column width, like that, okay? Cell padding plus photo height, a CG float, right? This thing is a CG float, right? A CG float. Oh, I want to make this thing a CG float too, and a CG float over here. Okay, now there's a lot of warnings over there, so don't worry about that. We just have to use these things, okay? So the frame, the X offset, the X is X offset subscript column. Now can you guess what is the Y offset? The Y position. The Y position is, of course, the Y offset subscript column, right? Where the width is column width and the height is column, oops, the column height, right? Just the height. Like that. So now we have the frame. Next thing, let's calculate the inset frame of this thing. Let's inset frame. Okay. It's just yelled at us that you create a variable, you create a constant, but you never use it. Okay. So let the inset frame to be the frame.inset by, and then we inset by the cell padding like this, and the DY is also cell padding. Okay, now this inset frame is going to be used by the attribute. Is going to be used by the attribute, not this frame. Okay, so let's attribute to be UICollectionViewLayout attribute, and then for the cell with the index path like this, we just create the attribute over here. Okay, so let me make a comment for you. Create cell attribute. Layout attributes, like that. Next thing, let's assign the frame of this attribute, because the frame has the X position, the Y position, the Y position, the width and height, right? So attribute dot frame to be our inset frame, like that. And then guess what? We just create the attribute. Now let's append this attribute into the cache. The attribute cache. Attribute cache dot append our attribute like this. Okay? Now, after we're done with one item like this, remember that all we did over here is just we looped through each of the item inside the first section of the collection view, right? Each of the item has where is the column, where is the X offset and the Y offset, right? So after we're done with each of the thing, we have to update the column, we have to update the Y offset and the X offset. Right? We don't need to update the X offset because we already calculate that, but we need to update the column and the Y offset. How can we do that? Well, let's do it. Y offset subscript column to be the Y offset subscript column plus the height. Okay? Now, this is very important. If you miss this thing, it's going to be really messy because the Y offset, let's say we're moving from this thing, right? And the Y offset of this thing is 0 right now, right? And now you have to be really careful with this thing because if you don't do it right, if you don't update this thing right, then your collection view is going to be really messy. What do I mean by that? Because the Y offset by default is 0, 0, okay? But if you move on from this cell into this cell, then the Y offset just change, right? It changed from here, 0, to something over here. Plus, it means that from 0 to the height of this cell right here, right? So we have to change it from 0 over here to the height of that thing. And then when we jump over here, we'll update that thing too. So the Y offset is going to be the Y offset column plus the height that we calculate over here, right? Make sense? Now, I know there's a lot of things, and if you ask, hey, how do you know that? Well, I don't know that. I learned it, okay? I learned it from a lot of resources, from open source projects, from a lot of blog posts and reading, from books, those kind of things, okay? So, and from raygwendelik.com. You don't know that? Write that down, raygwendelik.com. A lot of awesome blog posts, okay? So now, we have the columns, the Y column. Let's jump ahead and we check if the column is greater than the number of columns minus 1, like this. Then we will make the column to be 0. Otherwise the column plus equals 1, right? So we check if it is the first column, then we jump to the, if it is already the second column, we jump to the first. If it is the first, we jump to the next one, okay? Just iterate like that. Number of columns, this is an int again. Maybe I should put that as an int in the number of columns. Okay, now our job next is we have to figure out, right? We have to figure out, okay, how can we get this photo height and the caption height? How can we do that? Before we do that, let's fulfill 2 other methods, okay? Let's fulfill just 2 other methods. Number 1 is so that we know, okay? So that we know the content height of the collection view. So that's step number 4. Before we go to the next one is that we make someone tells us what is the height of the photo and what is the height of the caption. Let's make the content height of the collection view to be known. So let's go over here, all the way outside of this thing, still inside the Pinterest layout class. Okay. Another method that we're going to override is collection view content size. It is a variable. Now, if you don't know about that, a variable can be override too. Especially, I believe in Swift 3 or Swift 2 or something. So we will override this variable. Okay. So let's return a CG size with a width, collection view, content size, right? So we will return a CG size with a width of content width and content height, like that. Where does that come from? Well, over here we have a variable, private var, content height, and content width. So that every time we get new, we calculate new height, new width for our collection view for each of the cell, right? We update the content height. Where's that? We update the content height. I need to look into here. We update it over here, somewhere over here, right? We have a caption height, the height of this thing, and we change it. I missed it, right? So over here, we override this variable because we want to return the content size of the collection view, meaning that the whole content, what is the size of the whole content, so that the scroll view can knows what is the whole content of inside that scroll view, which is the parent class of the superclass of collection view. Now we return the content height, but we never update the content height inside this thing after we calculated each of the attributes for each of the cell. So when we update the column and the Y offset, we also have to update the content height because we know what is the height of each of the item. We have to update the height of the content too. So content height, okay, right over here before the Y offset. Okay, so the content height is going to be the maximum of the content height, and the frame.max y, like this. Okay, so that, now why is that? Well, because the max y of the frame right now, the current item, is going to be the y, right, is going to be the last thing. Okay, the last cells over here. So this thing right now, for example, the max y will be over here, right? And the content height right now, before we update that thing, is going to be very small like that. So we update that thing like this. Okay, now I know it can get really confusing, so I would suggest that go through this with me. Okay, just go through this with me. And then after we're done with this training, I would recommend, just as any learning, repetition is the mother of skills. So after this, go again in the code and look through that. If it is necessary, trace it by hand, and then it will make sense for you. Okay, so Now we have the content height. Let's override another method, the last method inside this thing. We call it layout attribute for the element in the rectangle. Layout attribute for an element in the rectangle. Very important, because now we have the attribute for each of the item. We have to return those attributes into the collection view. Right? The collection view is going to call this thing. Now you have to be careful here that this method is layout attribute for items in the rectangle CG rect. The return an array of UICollectionView layout attribute. Okay, very important, because there's a lot of methods. There are a lot of other methods look very similar like this. So you have to be really careful when you implement this thing. Okay, now let's have our layout attribute to be an empty array of UICollectionView layout attribute like this. And then, because we only have to return the layout attribute of the items inside this rectangle. That is all this method asks. The collection view asks that. So we only have to return the layout attribute of the items inside this rectangle. Okay, so the way we do that is we use something we call in core graphics, I believe. Not core graphic. It's just UI view frame, literally. That is, we want to know if the attribute of each of the attributes inside the cache, the frame of that intersect this rectangle. Then it means that that item is inside this rectangle, right? So we check for each of the attributes inside the attribute cache, right? If the attributes that frame, right, intersect the rectangle like this, then the layout attribute will append our attribute like that. Okay? So all we did is we'll check for each of the attributes inside the attribute cache. We'll check if that frame of the attribute intersect with the rectangle that this method passing to us. Then we'll append that thing into the layout attribute we have initially, like that. And then all we have to do is return the layout attribute. Okay? So that is all it takes for the Pinterest class. Well, almost. Now, our job, the next one, number 5, that's number 4, right? We create the custom class, we calculate the attributes for each of the cells, or sort of, because we still miss the photo height and the caption height. Now, we said we just had the content height for the collection view, right? Now, number 5, we have to make someone, in this case, I already revealed it, okay? So, assume that I didn't say this. We have to make someone to tell the layout object what is the height of the photo and what is the height of the caption. I know this is silly, but let me explain. This is very important. So, when you go over here, right, inside this method, we're still inside this, and we calculate the frame. We say the photo height to be 0, the caption height to be 0, but we never know it. And indeed, this is just a layout class, a view class. We don't know what is the height of the photo. We don't know what is the height of the caption. We don't know what is inside that single item of the item size, of the collection view cell. We don't know that. We don't have any information about that, right? So how do we know that? How can we get the information? Let's think about it. Well, let's think about it. How can we know? We have that collection view over here, and we have the collection view controller over here, and I'm talking about MVC, okay? So we have the collection view over here, we have the collection views cells over here, right? A bunch of views, and then we have the collection view controller, and then we have the post, which is the model, and the layout is over here. But the views doesn't talk to each other, right? Only the controller talks to the views, and the controller talks to the models. And how can we know? So how can we know the photo height and the caption height? Well, one way. Here's one way. One way is that we're going to have an instance, right? We're going to have a reference of that controller. Now, we cannot have the reference to other views. because it doesn't work. Because it may get destroyed during the processing. We don't know about that, right? Because now the collection view cells, it gets dequeued. So we don't know whenever that is still exists or not. We don't know about that. So one way we know for sure is that collection view controller. It is like the main hub of all of our app, right? So that collection view controller, okay, we can have that. So one way, here's one way. One way is that we can have a reference of that collection view controller inside this Pinterest layout.script. Okay, so our way is something like this. We have a variable called something like controller, which is a Pinterest collection, right? A Pinterest something, right? Oh, Newsfeed. This is a Newsfeed collection view controller, and optional like this because maybe it is nil initially,